In Federalist 38, Madison talks about how incoherent the opposition is. He says all the people who are criticizing us over this Constitution do not make sense. Just like he said in the last paper in Federalist 37, he makes a point that they either haven't read the new Constitution, or if they've read it, they are such opponents of this Constitution because of their own benefits, that all they come up with is excuses to reject this new Constitution, this new plan. And he almost reminds the readers that if you put all of these anti-federalists, all these people together, they could not ever agree to do anything together, or they could not even produce a result. They could not come up with a plan to unite this country, because their knowledge is superficial, and some of them are not thinking of the long term of the country. He starts this Federalist by saying that we are the only people in the course of history that we have been lucky enough to have a group of men get together, deliberate, think deeply, and come up with a plan to unite 13 different states into a big federal republic, a representative democracy. He says when you look at the history of all other confederacies, of all other countries, of all other places, people have got desperate, and they've given one person the authority to write the laws that they have to follow. And a lot of times that's turned out to be awful, even if the lawgiver was a great person. He says, this is the first time that 13 different states, now in this case Rhode Island hadn't sent any representatives, so 12 states sent representatives to Philadelphia for them to sit down and debate and come up with a plan that is not perfect. He says, we know it is not perfect. We said it in the last paper, but it's the best that can be gotten. It's the best that can be found. So he starts here with, it is not a little remarkable that in every case reported by ancient history in which government has been established with deliberation and consent, the task of framing it has not been committed to an assembly of men, but has been performed by some individual citizen of preeminent wisdom and approved integrity. Okay, here on the board I have this is the title of a book written by Plutarch. He was a historian, and he wrote about the lives of famous Greeks and Romans. Very famous Greeks and Romans, and Federalists' audience, when Hamilton, Jay, and Madison wrote these articles, they knew that people who would be reading them, the anti-Federalists, would be knowledgeable about this work. Because a lot of the Americans, educated Americans at the time, had read this book, Plutarch's Lives. It's actually Plutarch's Lives of Famous Greeks and Romans. I've just written it, the short version. So here in the next paragraph, there's some reference to the historical material that's in Plutarch's Lives. Okay. Minos, we learn, was the primitive founder of the government of Crete, and Zaleucus was of that of Locrians. Theseus first, and after him Draco and Solon, instituted the government of Athens. Lycurgus was the lawgiver of Sparta. The foundation of the original government of Rome was laid by Romulus, and the work completed by two of his elective successors, Numa and Tullius Hostilius. On the abolition of royalty, the consular administration was substituted by Brutus, who stepped forward with a project for such a reform, which he alleged had been prepared by Servius Tullius, and to which his address obtained the assent and ratification of the Senate and people. This remark is applicable to confederate governments also. Amphictyon, we're told, was the author of that which bore his name. Remember, we talked about this Amphictyonic League, named after Amphictyon. The Achaean League received its first birth from Achaeus and its second from Aratus. So he says, according to Plutarch and some of the other historians, we see even the great names of the personalities of the past. These were people that their community was desperate, and they gave these individuals the right to write them the laws and their constitutions. He says that's why we are different. People in different states chose delegates, or state legislatures chose delegates to go to Philadelphia Convention and write this Constitution for you. This is the first time that this act of deliberation has been done by a group, an assembly of very well-known people. Because remember, when the members of the convention, the delegates to the convention in Philadelphia, they were chosen not by people directly, but by the state legislatures. It was the ratifying conventions that the people voted for ratifying delegates to those special conventions to see whether a constitution will pass or not. The next paragraph says, what degree of agency these reputed lawyers might have in their respective establishments, or how far they might be clothed with legitimate authority of the people, cannot in every instance be ascertained. In some, however, the proceeding was strictly regular. Draco appears to have been entrusted by the people of Athens with indefinite powers to reform its government and laws. In English, you will hear draconian measures, draconian laws, which is very severe. It's named after Draco, because he just wrote laws that were very, very severe. And that's why it's talking about it here. Solon, according to Plutarch, was in a manner compelled by the universal suffrage of his fellow citizens to take upon him the sole and absolute power of new modeling the Constitution. The proceedings under Lycurgus were less regular, but as far as the advocates for a regular reform could prevail, they all turned their eyes towards the single efforts of that celebrated patriot and sage, instead of seeking to bring about a revolution by the intervention of a deliberative body of citizens. See, these people, these Greeks, thought, no, we're not going to get a group of people to write a constitution for us, to deliberate on it for us. We're just going to get one person. And he says, look at what we have done. We have chosen an assembly to do this and give you the best possible constitution. He's being realistic, just like we talked about it in the last paper. He's being very realistic. He says, we had to come up with a compromise that would work for people from different states with different interests. So he keeps reminding people of that. So we'll return with part 2.